My name's Brig, and if you're new to the PLC process or you haven't met me yet, I'm glad you found me. I serve educators in making sense of the PLC process in a simple and doable way. In this video, I'll make the 7-step learning cycle clear to you, because that's the 7-step cycle for improving learning of the students and growing as an instructor, which comes from my book, The PLC Dashboard. Let's get started. The 7-step learning cycle is all about getting clarity of the PLC process. It takes DuFour's 4 critical questions and puts a little more meat on the bones so that teachers know exactly what steps to take. The learning objectives we have for today is first to explore the 7-step learning cycle. The second objective is to learn how it applies to singletons. And the third is, of course, to develop actionable next steps. I'm going to encourage you to take out a Post-it note or something to record some notes on, and then to find a couple of next steps for you as we go throughout this video to implement those next steps. All right, let's jump into the 7-step learning cycle. In general, the 7-step learning cycle starts with determining something that's essential. That should come from the standards, it should come from the curriculum, it should come from the REAL criteria, which is an acronym on page 45 in my book that says, this is worthy of going through the 7-step cycle. It's that thing that you'd be embarrassed if a kid couldn't do after being in your class. Like making a claim, graphing a line, finding the surface area of a rectangular prism, knowing your multiplication facts, adding and subtracting within 20. Why do we do this step? We do this step to move away from a teach, test, move on mindset to a determine the essential and ensure the learning of it. That's the reason we do this step. So it starts by determining the essential. Everything starts from there. From that step, the next step is to set a SMART goal and to create the common formative assessment. The reason we do the SMART goal is because it binds teams together. It says they're not your kids and my kids that we're setting different goals for. They're our kids. They're not your special ed kids or your kids who are English language learners. They're our kids. So you'd set a SMART goal for the entire 7th grade math students or for the entire 3rd grade, not by teacher. And the simple way to set a SMART goal is just to say the percent proficient by what date. And usually that date is about a month in length. To create the common formative assessment, think about this. It should be more quiz-like than it is end of chapter-like. That common formative assessment would be more like it could even be a project. It could be a presentation. It could even be a performance task or something observable. But it could also be something pen and paper. But think of it being more narrow than it is wide. And we create that before we start teaching. The reason is so that we start with the end in mind. We know exactly where it is we're hoping to go. Then we teach, and after we've taught, then there are 3 steps that happen very quickly. The first one is giving that common formative assessment. The key to that step, and the thing I get the most questions about, is that giving of the common formative assessment should be on the same day. Now, some teachers might say, well, my kids weren't ready. And that happens often. But we should still give that common formative assessment on the same day, even if one of the teachers feels like their kid's not ready. Because remember, the second purpose of the PLC process is for the educators to learn new instructional strategies from their colleagues. And it might be that a way to compress the curriculum a little better or more would be a new instructional strategy to learn. So we give the CFA on the same day. The next step is to determine inter-rater reliability. The reason we do that is there's no reason to compare results if we're not given the test the same way, if we're not grading the tests the same way. So inter-rater reliability is the process of grading a few assessments to calibrate our grading. In other words, maybe we'd put an ungraded piece of student work on the doc camera and I would grade it. Maybe I gave it a 2 because they didn't capitalize and punctuate it. Maybe my colleague gave it a 4 because they had great ideas and content. That's something the team wants to work out. What is the grade that we're going to give papers that look like this? It's a great way to learn together, and it's a step that's required for this process to really work well. The 5th step is to share results. A key to sharing results is that we are not going to share results of the proficiency, teacher by teacher, to judge one another. We're sharing results to figure out what's working best in the challenging task of getting kids to learn essential things. So we would want to know what percent of my kids were proficient on this formative assessment and what percent of your kids were proficient. Again, it's to figure out some new instructional strategies that we can learn as educators. After that fifth step comes the sixth step, where we intervene and extend in class. This is a real key. The kids don't go to an interventionist, someone else. They stay with the classroom teacher during core time, and that intervention is planned. We might use a different modality. So for instance, if we used a kinesthetic way to teach it the first time, we might use an auditory or a visual way to learn it in the intervention. We might also have learned some instructional strategies from a colleague that worked better, and we would want to implement that in the intervention that we do in class as soon after that CFA as possible. And while we're intervening with the kids who are below proficient, we also want to extend the learning for the kids who are at proficient or above. So some teachers call that win time, W-I-N. It's what I need time, because we have to grow all the kids academically, the kids who know it, and the kids who don't. So maybe we take 20 minutes a few days after we gave the formative assessment to intervene, and during that time we'd also do an extension. Maybe we do this 2 or 3 times, maybe once, but we'd want to then reassess the students who hadn't learned it to see if they're at proficient or above at that point. Then the end of the unit is going to come at some point. And when the end of the unit comes, it is time to move on. We may have done 2 or 3 in-class reteachings and interventions, but it's now time to move on. At that point, the students who still haven't learned that essential skill at the proficient or above level are going to be ready for what's called Tier 2 interventions. They're going to need additional time that's not in core time at this point. It might be during a tutorial period or an intervention period that's a part of the master schedule. But we want to know those kids by skill and by name so that they can get the help they need on the skills we've determined as essential. And there's one final step. That's to capture team learning and make changes to our instruction. Because if we are truly professionals who are learning in community, we will be not only learning new instructional strategies as a result of this process, we'll also be implementing them. And that is the 7-step learning cycle, which establishes what Marzano calls the guaranteed and viable curriculum. It's guaranteed because every teacher on the team is going to follow these steps, and it's viable because the number of essentials we've picked is a doable amount for a mere mortal human being teacher who has sick days, and we have fire drills and disruptions and snow days and all that stuff. So that's why the list of essentials we pick is really critical, because we don't want to pick the things that aren't going to, 1, be really critical for the kids to learn, but 2, for us to learn some new instructional strategies. One of the main questions I get is, how does this 7-step learning cycle apply to singletons? So what would change for a singleton? Well, think about it. Could a singleton, even if they were working in isolation, could they still do step 1, determine an essential? Yeah, they could. Could they do step 2, which is to set a SMART goal on what percent of kids they want proficient in that essential skill by a certain date? Yeah, they can. But in step 3, where they are to create a common formative assessment, that would change. They would just be creating a formative assessment. Again, it'd be quiz-like, it would be short, it could be a project, it could be a presentation. Then we do the teaching. In step 3, we wouldn't give a common formative assessment, but we could give a formative assessment. Now step 4, that one does disappear if you're a singleton working in isolation. There is no one else to ensure inter-rater reliability because you know that singleton's the only one grading the assessment. But step 5, we could not share results because there wouldn't be a colleague, but we could know the results, kid by kid, skill by skill on each essential. Then we could still intervene and extend in step 6 in class. We'd come to the end of the unit. There'd be some kids who hadn't learned it. They'd be ready for tier 2. And then in step 7, we wouldn't capture team learning, but we could certainly capture our learning. And we could make changes to our instruction so that the next time we teach this essential skill to the students that we have, we'll be even better at increasing the proficiency for those kids. That's the overview of the 7-step cycle for teams and for singletons. This process takes about 3 to 4 weeks to get through with a team meeting about an hour a week. Now keep in mind that the 7-step learning cycle fits into the 1-page essential learning target plan that's in my book. That essential learning target plan, that 1 page that's for teams and 1 page that's very similar for singletons, is tracked in the PLC dashboard, which is a low-tech way to tell how teams and singletons are doing with the PLC process. If you want more information, please check out my book, The PLC Dashboard. It's the book I would have wanted when I was a principal and teacher leader, trying to get this PLC process started in a doable way. There's also a lot of resources on my website that I want you to be aware of. I have a newsletter. I've got plenty of free downloadables that are for use for teachers and for principals. And that website is briglane.com.